Hi, my name is Justin Kuvion. I'm a senior AVS specialist at VMware. For the last 2 years, I've spent my time representing Azure VMware Solution, which is a Microsoft product, a PaaS offering in the cloud for VMware customers. Today, I'm going to take you through an overview of what it is, how it works, and why you should consider it potentially for your environment. So the agenda today is we'll talk a little bit about what makes Azure VMware Solution unique. We'll talk about its use cases and probably a few different examples of those use cases from our work here at VMware and Microsoft. We'll talk about the architecture because that's important to understand, and how it's supported, as well as the general benefits it offers customers. So recently when I was presenting to Microsoft, they asked me a great question. What is the superpower of your solution? Well, Azure VMware Solution, in my opinion, offers one thing better than any other solution when it comes to cloud, and that is the speed at which you are able to enter the cloud. So what Azure VMware Solution does, and as a whole, is it allows clients to avoid the lengthy refactoring process and having to move VMware workloads over to Azure environments. So what we do is we set up a software-defined data center within the Azure construct. We tie that together with your data center, and then you're able to use VMware's vMotion technology in order to move those workloads over to Azure, and that's it. You're consuming. Now, obviously, there are a few more steps than that, but generally, this can save months, if not years, in terms of getting you into Azure and helping you move along your path towards your cloud strategy. The other really nice thing is that Azure VMware Solution is a first-party Microsoft product. So as a first-party Microsoft product, rather than like a third-party marketplace item, for example, it allows you such that every single dollar you spend in Azure, on Azure VMware Solution counts the same as if it were Azure native or any other Azure product. That's really important for most customers. It also allows you to avoid, of course, any professional services or just in general time that would accompany any lengthy refactoring. So again, in general, what it does is allows you to use VMware, the tool that you've already been using, in order to move to Azure. And there is also a side benefit, which is that Microsoft offers licensing of VMware along with the solution, but any Microsoft licensing that you have on-prem is subject to something called the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. So if you have Windows servers, for example, you use on-prem, you probably will, but certainly check with Microsoft, be able to move those licenses to any Azure product, including Azure VMware Solution, and continue running them within your Azure environment. It also, of course, allows you to leverage your existing VMware investment and not have to retrain your team, as well as there's a side benefit of if you have any end of support workloads. What I mean by this is Windows 2012 environments, for example, you can move those to Azure VMware Solution and get extended support for a period of up to 3 years for those environments. That can allow you to have support all the way through 2026 on Windows 2012 environments. So that's a pretty compelling thing for those of us that have workloads that run on those steadfast environments. And then finally, this doesn't preclude you from using Azure native either. Most clients actually will use this in conjunction with an Azure native strategy. And if you run into folks that say, hey, our ultimate end strategy is to get to Azure native, this doesn't preclude any of that. What it allows you to do instead is, instead of having to refactor all of your environment once, you can use VMware as the tool to get you to the cloud. And then then you can pick and choose each individual application as it makes sense to move to Azure native. So typically we see a few different use cases with Azure VMware Solution. Number one, most popular is the data center lift and shift use case. So that just simply means, hey, I'm in a data center today, I'm on-prem, and I'd like to get to the cloud. So typically we're involved in evacuating data centers. One of the great times to look at this is if and when you have a colo agreement that's up for renewal, for example, or if you have a hardware refresh coming up. And again, what we'll do is we'll take all of that existing footprint and we'll keep it in its VMware format and send it to Azure. Of course, the same can be done for migration of individual applications. And then also another very popular use case is our disaster recovery use case. So as an example, I ran into a client in Dallas, Texas, and they had always had their primary data center in Dallas and their secondary / disaster recovery data center in Houston. And then in the winter of 2021, the entire Texas electrical grid went out. And so what they realized was that their disaster recovery plan was not geographically diverse enough. And so what we did was we built them a disaster recovery environment on VMware in this case, the North Central region, in Chicago. All we had to do was tie together their existing secondary data center and that North Central region, do a vMotion over to the North Central region, and then we deprecated the Houston data center and they shut it down. So now they had a Dallas-based primary data center and an Azure-based disaster recovery data center, and all of that is possible with VMware. And by the way, in this circumstance, that this also means that the VMs as they were sitting within Azure were in VMware format. So if a failover or a disaster recovery scenario unfolded, there would be no translation. Basically, they just move right over to the other data center. Additionally, we run into that Windows 2012 workload. So if you have any Windows Server 2012, this says 2008, there's about one more year on that. But Windows 2012 or SQL Server 2012, if you move those to AVS, the support and security will be extended through 2026, which saves a ton of money because the cost to support those platforms without doing that moving forward is extremely expensive. There is also a VDI use case. So if you want to be able to run, for example, Horizon VDI within Azure, there's two different offerings, one of which is called Horizon on AVD, which is a PaaS offering within Azure Native, but then you can also run Horizon on or Citrix or any other VDI on AVS, which is your platform in Azure. So that is also a very popular use case. The way we do this is really important to understand because it fundamentally changes the way that you're actually going to consume in Azure. So the way we do this is we look at the aggregate CPU, memory, and storage required for either the entire data center or the set of VMs that you want to move. And we build a commodity-based hyper-converged stack within a Microsoft region for you, and it is dedicated only to you. So the typical way that we'll do that is we'll get like an RV Tools, a Live Optics, or a Microsoft Mover output of the application you want to run or the whole data center you want to run. And then again, we'll build these node-based building blocks, which contain CPU, memory, and storage, and networking, and software, all built into an N+1 little mini data center for you within the Azure region of your choice. Now, these individual environments actually sit next to the Azure native environments. So the nice side benefit you get of moving your production environment over to AVS is that if you're interacting with any Azure native PaaS offerings, you're literally now you're going feet from your production workloads over to your PaaS offerings. Or at the very worst, if you have to go to another region, you're also transversing, in that circumstance, the Microsoft dedicated global backbone. So what does that mean to you? That means if you move your production environments to Azure VMware Solution, they'll now be sitting physically very, very close to Azure native environments, and the interaction between those two, the latency goes way down, which means your performance goes way up potentially. So back to that hyperconverged cluster that we create for you. We build it based on the sizing that we do for you and reach out to VMware to get that sizing done. And we put in each node vCenter, NSX, HCX, and vSAN. And we put that on each node in an all-you-can-eat format. Then we connect to your existing on-premises data center via a Microsoft Express route, or now we support SD-WAN VPN connections. Once we make that connection, then we can use vMotion to move from your existing on-premises data center into your now software-defined data center within Azure, your AVS environment. That is what shortcuts the process of having to refactor. We're now going to store that data within AVS in VMware format, and you've just skipped a whole lot of disruption. There is also potentially a way, by the way, that you can do layer 2 stretch in order to not have to change IP addresses, for example. That all comes with pros and cons, so make sure to contact your AVS specialist or your Microsoft Azure specialist. These are the specs today for the most part of the nodes. And what it is a server with 36 cores, 576 gigs of RAM, and about 15 terabytes of premium SSD per node. We do call them nodes, not servers. Main reason is because it's compute memory and storage, as well as all of the software that you see on the left of this screen. So we just did an upgrade to 7.0 on ESX, for example. Most greenfield deployments are going to be on 7.0, but also you get vSAN NSX, which is used for the software-defined networking on the Microsoft side. In other words, it's used between the Azure native environment and the AVS environment. So it's used for software-defined networking there. You don't actually have to have NSX on-prem, but we use that. We use HCX. vSAN is the underlying file system that makes the cluster that we're setting up fully redundant. And you get all of the software on the left in an all-you-can-eat format per node, and you end up paying and consuming per node per hour in Azure. Now, I'll go into that more in the future, but this is why I've explained the architecture. I've explained the architecture this way because it's important to understand that you are no longer going to be paying by the instance or by the drip, so to speak. You'll be paying by the node. And we'll help you to understand how much of your VMs will fit per node and what the cost of scaling and scaling down is, but it's important to understand that distinction. Now, there's a minimum of 3 nodes per vSAN cluster, which is the underlying technology that is used here. So that is your minimum entry point. I get asked a lot about what the pros and cons of AVS are. Probably the biggest con is if you're very small and you only want to use run 5 VMs in Azure, this will probably not be the solution for you. And the main reason for that is because it will probably look expensive. You have to buy a minimum 3-node cluster. Now, if you do have a decent amount of VMs or just simply large VMs, this will be very cost effective. And it allows you to scale all the way up to 16 nodes per cluster and up to 96 nodes per Azure Private Cloud instance. And you can have multiple Azure Private Cloud instances. In fact, we have customers that have hundreds and hundreds of nodes set up in AVS today. It is available in almost every single region in Azure. There are some exceptions. Here in North America, where I'm speaking to you from today, we have almost every single region. We're working today on US Gov because it carries some advanced certifications and things that are needed for it. Excuse me. And then 2 others that we do not support today are US West 3, which is on the roadmap, and US West Central and Cheyenne, Wyoming. But other than that, all of the other regions are supported. There are, in North America, there is one region that has a slightly different version of nodes. It's US West 2, and that node is called the AV36P. You'll be able to see all that information on the Azure pricing calculator. Basically, that's a very similar node, but it carries a little bit more memory and a little bit more storage. And then, again, in each of these locations, not only do we have AVS clusters, but we have personnel from Microsoft that are certified and know how to manage this environment for customers. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. And that is why it's not available in every single region, is because we are still in the process of training particular regions and making sure that they can support our customers' need. Check Microsoft's website for additional updates. This recording was done in September of 2022. all of the solution is supported by Microsoft. So customers go into their Azure portal, they can set up support, tickets, etc. You don't have to worry about whether it's a VMware issue or a Azure issue. You open a support ticket from Microsoft. Now, of course, VMware technology is very important underneath the hood, and Microsoft has a agreement internally with VMware, where if there's a corner case or they need VMware's help in any way, we have an escalation procedure that includes VMware. So don't worry, you're completely covered, but we've simplified it for you because it's all supported and managed through Microsoft, as are all the rest of your Azure offerings. If you're utilizing the DR scenario, which again, contact your account team, because we can go into an entire hour's worth of discussion on how you can architect DR as well as backup. But please understand, we have a number of different independent software vendors that are supported for use in both data protection and disaster recovery, as well as DevOps environments within AVS. So, for example, DR might be a hot site. We also support things like a pilot light implementation where you have a minimum cluster running and the rest attached to storage. And then you only scale up upon the need of a disaster recovery event. Those are all supported via the folks you mentioned that are mentioned here. This is a third-party list, so you actually don't already see SRM. SRM from VMware is also supported for this use case. And again, we have multiple different ways that we can architect it, all the way from like a cold backup, all the way to a pure mirrored hot site using Azure VMware Solution. Now, it's worth mentioning, like, this is where I get a lot of questions typically on, like, well, how do availability zones, et cetera, work within AVS? So remember that the Azure VMware Solution environment is set in a different cage within the Microsoft region of your choice. It is not a nested solution that sits on Azure native. Okay. Now, the pro of the way we do it is that you get a dedicated infrastructure just for your organization. It is not shared with anyone else, and you don't have to worry about if your capacity is there, if someone's going to take it or anything. It's dedicated to you. But it is a different environment, and so because of that, we're going to have to architect it a little bit differently than we do Azure native environments. You might look at it like, how do you back up a hyperconverged cluster on-prem today? It would probably be very similar in Azure VMware Solution, except that we're going to offer more managed, cloud-like approach to it. So again, reach out to us for more information. One of the huge benefits of selecting Azure VMware Solution is that it allows you to take that existing environment you have today, move it to the cloud very quickly, but also get it managed like it's a cloud. Now, this is not just taking a hyperconverged stack of VMware and co-locating it within Microsoft's data center, because what Microsoft is going to do is manage all physical infrastructure, physical security, hardware break fix, ESXi host patching, ESXi upgrades, all of that stuff that you do today on-prem that takes so much of your time, but doesn't really actually equate to competitive advantage for your company or service to your end users. Microsoft is now going to give that to you as a service, because it is a service. It's a cloud PaaS offering within Microsoft. So everything you see on this slide that's in blue, Microsoft will handle. One of the questions I get a lot is, how does the upgrade process work? So for example, we just upgraded our clients to 7.0. Microsoft notified clients they could opt out of it if they wanted to, as long as they approve the timeline. Microsoft went in, added an additional node to the cluster non-disruptively, moved data around, did updates non-disruptively, moved data back, confirmed everything was working, then took off the extra node, and then now told the customer, congratulations, you're on ESX 7.0. So if that sounds a lot simpler than what you have to do today to upgrade your ESXi version, you're in the majority. And that's a huge reason why folks love Azure VMware Solution. It gets them into the cloud non-disruptively, and the benefits of the cloud. You get out of managing hardware. You get out of the hardware business altogether. And you still have the ability to scale up and scale down very, very quickly, much quicker than having to order, for example, another node for your hyper-converged on-prem gear. We all know what the supply chain is like today on that. Instead, you got a dedicated cage within Azure managed by professionals at Microsoft. Now, when your primary job is now going to become managing out to your end customers. And the way you're going to do that is the way you've always done it. So if we actually show you a demo, and there are several that we have available for you in YouTube videos, et cetera, there are some nuances, but for the most part, it looks like VMware. And that's a very good thing. Your team does not have to learn anything else. The actual management of resources, i.e. how you scale up and how you scale down, you go to the Azure portal to do that. So it's very simple, it's very streamlined, and it's there the same way that any other infrastructure item in Azure is. This solution also offers a ton of compliance that we give to our customers as part of the solution. So for example, PCI or SOX or HIPAA or any of those things that organizations need. Microsoft carries almost all of them. Now they are available on a region by region basis. Check with your Azure specialist, but there is a ton of compliance ability here in Azure VMware Solution. I'm just going to quickly state that this slide we could probably spend an entire hour on, but what's the real key of it is that I want all of you to know that the way that you currently connect to Azure, or the way that you were planning on connecting to Azure, will not change. Basically, we're going to continue to connect via the Microsoft Enterprise Edge, either via an express route or VPN connection. And there will still be that connection to Azure native if and when you want it. There is, however, when we set up a AVS environment, again, in that separate cage, a dedicated 25 gig express route that is plumbed between the Microsoft Enterprise Edge and the AVS environment itself. And that is where NSX is used, by the way. So what does that mean to you? That means you just have to connect to the Microsoft Enterprise Edge. You don't have to worry about separately connecting to this AVS cage. We're going to do all that for you behind the scenes, and you're off and running. This uses NSX. It is not required to use NSX in your customer data center. To be fair, we've run into all kinds of implementations, Cisco, Palo Alto, et cetera. And we have also support for advanced topologies like hub and spoke. Again, speak to your VMware or Microsoft representative about that. This is an extremely important slide, and I want you all to take a look at this and make sure that you don't skip over this. Your consumption in Azure VMware Solution is, of course, cloud-based. And in most cases, that's going to be OpEx-based. Now, there is actually a way to do that CapEx. But what I want you all to know is the way that you consume Azure VMware Solution within the Azure construct is that you do so on 3 different ways. Today, we offer hourly on-demand pricing, which is the most expensive way to consume, but it is the most flexible also. So it can be used for bursting environments or environments that you want to, scale up in the case of a DR event, et cetera. There is also a 1-year reserved and a 3-year reserved instance in Azure VMware Solution within Azure. These can both be paid monthly. There is no difference in price in paying upfront versus monthly, but some clients want to pay upfront so that they can make it a capital expenditure. But what this does is, again, all of these consumptions are per node, and in the case of the hourly on demand, it's per node per hour. In the case of a reserved instance, it's per node per month. And there's a price in the Azure pricing calculator that you can go to and take a look at that at any time, and is priced by region. Now, this is such an important point when it comes to Azure VMware Solution, because most clients are going to be either replacing a data center or moving a DR site, et cetera. And we would highly, highly recommend that in most of those cases, you select a reserved instance. This is because Azure has been extremely aggressive in pricing these environments to incent customers to move to Azure. So a 1-year reserved instance carries somewhere between 30 and 34% discount. A 3-year reserved instance carries somewhere between 50 and 54% discount off of the hourly rate. So that is very, very steep discount. It makes it extremely inexpensive. And particularly when you compare a similar sized environment in Azure Native, they're very similar on a compute basis, but when you go to add storage in Azure Native, they don't typically have a 54% discount on storage for RIs. So what we see across the board is, as long as you're big enough to have a 3-node requirement, this is going to be actually price parity or up to 20% less expensive than Azure Native. And that is not even accounting for the cost of having to refactor or to have to pay professional services to refactor and look at all your environments for you, which you would have to do on Azure Native. So straight out the gate, it is at price parity or less expensive, and you get to continue use VMware on it. Our customers love the solution for all the reasons I outlined, and we'll be happy to have you speak to a customer. One of the public references that I work with a lot and was personally involved with was Carhartt, an American manufacturer of apparel. And they had a situation where they had to get out of the data center because they had a hyper-converged on-prem vendor that was not working for them. And at the time, we were dealing with supply constraints for hardware. They came to us and said, can we put this in Azure? And we said, yes, you can put it in Azure, and you're a VMware environment. The fastest way to move this would be Azure VMware Solution. So they moved hundreds of AVS, they moved hundreds of VMs to AVS in less than a month. They were ecstatic about the ability to move that non-disruptively, and they continue to be a reference customer today. Look on Microsoft's website for the Carhartt reference account example, and you'll see exactly what I mean. I was personally involved in it, love those guys, and they're super happy, and we're super happy they're happy. Another use case is University of Miami. Again, take a look at these examples. They're all over there, all over the place. This has been an extremely successful solution, and we have single customers using over 300 nodes of AVS today. So it is battle hardened as well. In summary, Azure VMware Solution is a first-party Microsoft PaaS offering. Yes, it runs VMware on it, but it is a first-party Microsoft PaaS offering, and that allows you to use every single dollar towards the commitment of an enterprise Mac from Microsoft, as well as qualify for migration services. It offers dedicated hosting of your VMware environment in Azure. And by dedicated hosting, it also means management of that cluster. You get the benefits of simple, non-disruptive movement to the cloud without refactoring your applications and disrupting your environment. You get out of the hardware business, which means you are able to move those environments to the cloud very quickly and non-disruptively, and you get out of having to manage hardware break fix, upgrades, ESX, changes, hardware break and fix, etc. So that's a huge amount of time back to your daily life, hopefully. It utilizes the tools you already know and your business has run on for the last 20 years. VMware is extremely well respected for good reason. It works very well. And so this allows you to run VMware in your Azure environment. And then it is at or less than the same cost as Azure Native for a similar sized environment. Again, subject to the minimums of this is not an environment that you would want to move 5 or 10 VMs to, but most of our customers actually save money on the straight cost of the actual consumption just by implementing Azure VMware Solution. And that is even, they save a ton of money compared to running on-prem as well. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed our overview of Azure VMware Solution. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Justin Kuvion at VMware, or reach out to your Azure specialist at Microsoft, or your AVS specialist at VMware, or your core account executive at VMware. We have tons of resources to help you. And I thank you very much for your time today.